The British, for better and worse, have made a serious dent in world history. From the impact of cultural touchstones born in the nation to the many pies its empiric fingers were stuck in the past. The British Empire at its peak covered around a quarter of the Earth's landmass. This meant that British people could be found in pretty much every corner of the planet, as well as their descendants to this day. This has given the British a bit of a reputation in many parts of the world, from parts of the planet that were once ruled by the UK to countries that were either rivals or enemies to the British in the past. This reputation the British historically had, and some still hold on to this reputation to this day, is best seen in the various nicknames people from the island of Great Britain have acquired. Terms for British people have cropped up around the globe, with many of them tied to specific nations. These nicknames for British people range from being somewhat affectionate to being a tad more tongue-in-cheek to being considered outright offensive. Yes, some of these nicknames are considered derogatory. I'm going to be saying them here just for educational reasons, and they are not aimed directly at anyone in particular. Apologies if I upset any British people watching this video, myself included I suppose. It's also worth mentioning that while these terms are still heard today, many of them have deeper ties with the British historically, as opposed to the British people today. You only really hear of them today if someone is being somewhat jovial with their language, or they are talking in a way that emanates the past. Most people in the USA don't casually refer to the British as limeys anymore on a regular basis. And speaking of limeys, that's a great place to start. This is one of the more popular nicknames that the British have picked up during their time as the world's dominant superpower. While many parts of the world have called the British limeys, it is most often linked with being a term people from the USA would use for their neighbours across the pond. At face value, this name makes little to no sense. It doesn't sound anything like Britain or British, so it's clearly not from a rhyming origin. And Britain definitely does not have the climate to grow limes naturally. This nickname has its origin with the way that the British people travelled the globe during their heyday. So the old song goes, Britannia rules the seas. While ships and boats were the optimal way to transport people and cargo during the peak of the British Empire, it has its fair share of drawbacks. Voyages could take weeks and even months, and with little to no pit stops between the UK and the USA, sailors had to make sure they had everything they needed on board prior to their departures. While they would pack the essentials, food, booze and playing cards, not everything was as thought out. Many sailors on these trips caught a fairly unpleasant disease known as scurvy. People were unsure how to combat this condition or even knew what caused it. An answer was finally unveiled in 1757 when Scottish surgeon James Lind discovered that scurvy was caused by severe lack of vitamin C. Vitamin C is found pretty easily in various fruits and vegetables. While people ate these with abandon on land, sailors clearly forgot to bring them to sea. Now the British Navy knew why their crew were all getting scurvy, they needed a way to prevent this, and the answer was to carry a supply of limes and lime juice on board. Lime is a great source of vitamin C, so regularly consuming it on water prevented scurvy. This resulted in the British carrying lime juice to the nooks of the world they claimed. Eventually they became so deeply linked with lime that they acquired this nickname of limey too, due to their heavy consumption of the citrus, and it picked up heavy use in the USA. This is a weird name for British people, yet somehow it's not the only fruit that the British people would be referred to in their global empire. Down in Australia and New Zealand, British people have become referred to as poms or pommies. This name is believed to derive from the fruit of the pomegranate. Why a pomegranate exactly? We don't seem to be too sure. One theory is that it once again relates to scurvy. The fruit does also contain a good amount of vitamin C, so the logic is there. Another idea states that while British people were under the heat of the Australian sun, they would get severe sunburn and go bright red, with this shade of red being akin to the colour of a pomegranate. Another theory is the fact that pomegranate somewhat rhymes with immigrant. This makes sense too, as the British were indeed immigrants in the land down under. There is a non-fruit related theory on the origin of pom, however, and the idea is that the British prisoners who were sent to Australia in the early days of the land's colonisation had P-O-M-E or P-O-H-M written on their clothes. This supposedly stood for Prisoner of Mother England or Prisoner of Her Majesty respectively. Then either of these acronyms were shortened to just POM. This etymology, while worth mentioning, is widely considered to be false. There's little evidence to back this claim up and has all the trappings of a folk etymology. A key way in which folk etymologies arise is to help project an image onto a group of people. It's a whole thing. This etymology for POM relates to the old outdated stereotype that all Australians are convicts, and that's not the case. Meanwhile, in Canada, there's another food-based nickname the British have acquired. This time, however, However, it doesn't relate to a fruit, but instead a type of fish. Apparently in Canada, the British have become commonly referred to as kippers. This is one I hadn't heard of prior to the writing of this video, but from what I can gather, there is evidence of it to a varying degree. There isn't actually a specific kind of fish called a kipper. It is instead the name given to a herring when prepared in a specific way, normally by either smoking it or pickling it. While kippers are eaten around the world, they are highly linked with the UK. It also makes sense why they'd be eaten on long sea voyages, as herring could be caught while at sea, and the method of pickling them or smoking them made it easy to preserve them for long journeys. Clearly, the British consumed enough of these in Canada for it to become a nickname for them. What's interesting about this one to me is the image that must come along with this nickname. Kippers are known for being a food that is quite smelly and kind of gross. Canadians referring to British people via this smelly, gross food might help us understand how Canadians thought about the British during this time period. A nickname the British have picked up closer to home is the term of tan. This is a name for British people that has been used in the neighbouring Ireland. This name stems from the troubles which Ireland faced over decades and the island's relationship with Great Britain. In the 1920s, British military officers, many of which being First World War veterans, were sent over to Ireland to assist with combating the Irish rebelling against British rule. These British soldiers were issued with distinct khaki uniforms, which consisted of the colours of black and tan. These soldiers were referred to as the Black and Tans, and eventually just tan became a term for British people in general. These First World War veterans who were being called Black and Tans in Ireland would have been given a different nickname during the time of the Great War. Tommy became a nickname for British soldiers during this war, and its origins are somewhat obscure. It has its ultimate origins with the longer term of Tommy Atkins as a term for British soldiers, but where this came from is somewhat unknown. We don't know if Tommy Atkins was the name for one specific soldier. One story claims that during the Battle of Boxtel in 1794, the Duke of Wellington came across a soldier named Tommy Atkins who was dying in the field, and his final words to the Duke were, "It's alright sir, it's all in a day's work." And from here, the Duke suggested that his name should be used as a personification for all brave British soldiers. It's a really debated origin, but it's one that has caught on as it symbolises the bravery and sacrifice that soldiers have carried out for their countries. We actually have earlier evidence of the name, however, which predates this legendary encounter between the Duke of Wellington and the supposedly real Tommy Atkins. The name is found in a 1745 letter sent from Jamaica, which related to a mutiny amongst troops on the island. One line simply reads that Tommy Atkins behaved splendidly. While there's more evidence with this one, it's easy to understand why the Duke of Wellington story is far more popular. This Tommy Atkins in Jamaica was rebelling against his ruler. That's not exactly the image Britain wants to project when referring to their brave, loyal soldiers as Tommies. However the name came about, it stuck around and became deeply linked with those who fought in the First World War. All these names for the British derive from places that have been under British rule at some point or another, and today speak English as their primary tongue. Yet these aren't the only names that the British have acquired over the course of history. Terms for British people, and in some cases the English specifically, have cropped up in other languages from places that have never been under British rule. Yeah, the British had such a reputation in the past that even places they had little to do with formed the names for them. A lot of these nicknames are simply translations of English or British in various languages. Take a term like Angla, which appears in the Hindustani languages of Hindi and Urdu. Of course, the places that mainly speak Hindi and Urdu, Pakistan and India, were under British rule, but we even have the Japanese Ikoku, which clearly comes from English too. Two of the more interesting nicknames come from the languages of French and German. France and Germany are two nations with a long history with Britain. Across different parts of history, their relationship has fluctuated from allies to enemies. French has formed the nickname of Le Roast Beef for the British. This, if you couldn't tell, translates into being roast beef. Roast beef is a food that has become heavily linked with the British in the eyes of the French. So much so that it has been used as an insulting term for people from this island since the 19th century or so. Germany, meanwhile, has the term of Inselaffe to refer to the British. This translates into meaning island ape. This comes from the old German idea that the people of the island of Great Britain are a tad more primitive and ape-like compared to those in their homeland. It may also have links to Charles Darwin, the Brit whose work brought the evolution theory to the spotlight and declared that we evolved from apes. Insulting the British goes even further back too. One of the earliest nicknames we know for the British was found etched into a tablet left at Hadrian's Wall by the Romans. Yeah, even the Romans were annoyed with the British. This tablet featured the Latin word of Britunculi, which translates into meaning nasty little Brits, which is fairly self-explanatory. What all these nicknames ultimately show us is that Britain and its natives have made a huge impact on the global stage. And while the actions of Britain has shaped so much of the modern world we live in, not everyone is exactly happy with what the British did. And that's completely understandable. You don't need to search too hard to uncover the many atrocities the British were responsible for throughout history. This has led to many parts of the world rebelling against the British, and that rebelling has taken many forms. In some cases, it was wars of independence against them, and in many cases, it's as simple as giving the people from this island silly little names. Name Explained depends on viewers like yourself supporting the channel financially on Patreon, so a huge thank you to everyone who does. Donating just $1 a month helps the channel amazingly and gets you bonuses including ad-free videos, exclusive content, the power to request ideas to be made into actual Name Explained videos, and your name at the end of the video with all these awesome people. Visit patreon.com/NameExplain or click the link down below to find out how you too can support the channel. Thank you. Thanks for reaching the end of the video. Why not watch another and subscribe to keep up to date on all things Name Explain. You can find myself on Instagram where I'm NameExplainYT, and join the Facebook group Friends of Name Explain to talk with myself and other name nerds. All that will be linked down below. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video, and once again, thank you all so much.